He was a lucky man, a lucky coach.
Toni Nadal goes off on Alcaraz for complaining about having a target on his back after Indian Wells' loss. Rafael Nadal's uncle just publicly contradicted the world number one on national Spanish radio. And Toni Nadal goes off on Alcaraz with the kind of bluntness that only comes from 16 years of building the most mentally bulletproof champion this sport has ever produced. Alcaraz had complained about having a target on his back. His exact words, not a paraphrase, delivered twice across the same tournament. First, after barely surviving world number 28 Rinderknecht in 3 sets, where he told the press he was tired of opponents turning into Roger Federer every round. Then again, louder, after Medvedev dismantled him 6-3, 7-6, 3 in the Indian Wells semi-final to snap his flawless 16-match start to 2026.
California desert as he topples the world number one. Carlos Alcaraz suffers his first defeat in 2026. Tells Daniil Medvedev, great match indeed.
Toni Nadal heard both complaints and went on Radio Stadio with a verdict. I don't agree at all. It's not a battle against Alcaraz. It's a battle against the best. Former world number one publicly tearing apart the world current number one's post-loss framing on national radio, while Sinner, facing identical pressure as number two, went ahead and won the entire tournament. Subscribe for forensic tennis analysis that goes where the post-match coverage won't. The full breakdown of what Toni Nadal's challenge reveals about Alcaraz's mentality, his new coaching setup, and the mental gap now separating the sport's top 2 players starts right now. To understand why Toni Nadal's response landed as hard as it did, you need to go back to where the complaint originated, not in the post-loss press conference, but 3 rounds earlier when Alcaraz was still undefeated. Round 3 at Indian Wells. Arthur Rinderknecht, world number 28, a capable hard-court player, but not a name that appears in conversations about title contenders at a Masters 1000 event. Alcaraz lost the first set and found himself a breakdown in the second. He recovered, eventually winning 6-7, 6, 6-3, 6-2, and extended his 2026 winning streak to 14 matches. By every conventional measure, that result was entirely acceptable. A top seed grinding through a tricky opponent in difficult conditions. What Alcaraz said afterward was not conventional. During his on-court interview and subsequent press conference, he told the assembled media, "To be honest, I just sometimes get tired of playing Roger Federer every round. Sometimes just feel like, yeah, they playing really an insane level. I don't know if I'm feeling not the right way, but I feel it's just against me all the time. If they play like, that level every match, they should be higher in the ranking." He then added the phrase that became the flashpoint. "I feel like I have a target on my back, and I feel like if they don't play that kind of tennis, they can't win." Read that second sentence carefully. Alcaraz wasn't just describing the challenge of being world number one, he was suggesting opponents only beat him when they operate above their sustainable level, framing his own losses as anomalies rather than outcomes. For a player who had just survived a 3-set match against someone ranked 28th in the world, the framing raised immediate questions. Rinderknecht didn't beat him, Medvedev did. The Indian Wells semi-final on March 14th was not a close match by the standards of elite tennis. Medvedev won 6-3, 7-6, 3 in 1 hour and 37 minutes. He broke early in the first set and never relinquished control, converting both breakpoints he created while Alcaraz fought to stay competitive in the second set. When the tiebreak arrived, Medvedev raced to 6-1 before closing it on an ace. The Russian's serve was metronomic throughout, his baseline positioning suffocating Alcaraz's attempts to create angles, and his second serve efficiency reached 74%, a figure that prevented Alcaraz from building any rhythm in the return games. It was Medvedev's first victory over Alcaraz since the US Open semifinals in 2023. In the 4 meetings between them since that result, Alcaraz had won every single one, including the Indian Wells final in both 2023 and 2024. The scoreline was not a reflection of a fluke or an aberration. It was a tactically disciplined player executing a specifically designed match plan against an opponent he had studied across multiple years of defeats. Alcaraz's post-match press conference returned immediately to the same theme he'd introduced after the Rinderknecht match. He told reporters, "I said it when I played against Rinderknecht in round 3, for example, that what I'm just getting tired a little bit is to get that target on my back all the time. As I said, I have never seen Daniil playing like this before." The repetition is the key detail. This wasn't a one-off emotional response to an unexpected defeat. Alcaraz had introduced the complaint while he was still winning. He reinforced it after his first loss. The narrative that opponents elevate to an unsustainable level specifically against him was something he was actively constructing across the full arc of the tournament. He did attempt a more positive reframe later in the same press conference, saying, "I have to see the good things about this loss. It is about the people and the players thinking that they need to play like this level if they want to beat me." But by then, the target on my back framing had already been delivered twice, in 2 separate sessions, to 2 different groups of journalists. The positive reframe couldn't undo the complaint that preceded it. Toni Nadal is not a pundit. He is not a commentator hired to generate controversy around player statements. During their professional coaching partnership, he helped shape a player who won 16 Grand Slam titles under his direct guidance, ultimately reaching 22 across a full career. When he speaks publicly about how elite players should process the burden of being the best, the opinion carries a specific authority that very few voices in this sport can match. His response on Radio Estadio was precise and unambiguous. "I don't agree at all," he said. "It's not a matter of having a target on your back. When you play against someone who's better than you know you have to rush your shots a bit more. When you step out to play, you're well aware that you need to take a few more risks. Not because it's Alcaraz, but because the opponent knows Alcaraz is better." He continued, "I'm sure Medvedev would prefer to play against someone else and not Alcaraz or Sinner, but he knows that if he's up against them, he has to push harder. It's not a battle against Alcaraz, it's a battle against the best. And right now, Alcaraz is the best." The argument Toni Nadal is making is structurally different from a simple motivational disagreement. He is challenging the causal explanation Alcaraz offered for why opponents play well against him. Alcaraz's framing, that a target on his back produces elevated performances from opponents, implies something external and specific to his status. Toni Nadal's counter-argument removes that specificity entirely. Any player at any level raises their output when facing a superior opponent because tactical necessity demands it. The variable is competitive quality, not psychological targeting. He also reportedly told Zverev directly, according to his Radio Estadio comments, that the German needed to take more risks when facing either Alcaraz or Sinner. The advice was purely tactical, what the match situation mathematically demands from any player facing a superior opponent. The most powerful evidence supporting Toni Nadal's position didn't come from Toni Nadal. It came from Medvedev himself after he lost the final to Sinner. Medvedev described beating Alcaraz in the semi-final as feeling like winning the tournament, a statement he made in the context of how difficult it was to subsequently lose the final. His exact framing was bittersweet. He had achieved something significant in defeating Alcaraz, and then couldn't sustain that level against Sinner in a final where both sets required tiebreaks. But notice what Medvedev did not say. He didn't describe an unusual motivation specifically driven by Alcaraz's status. He described playing his best tennis, the same quality of tennis that had already taken him to titles in Brisbane and Dubai earlier in 2026, the same standard that produced a 9-match ATP winning streak entering the tournament. He told the press, "Playing someone like Carlos, you play many times, you lose many times. He's an amazing player with amazing shots, defense, attack, return, everything, so you need to be at your best." That sentence is Toni Nadal's argument delivered verbatim by the man who actually beat Alcaraz. Medvedev elevated because his own form demanded it, not because a target on Alcaraz's back psychologically triggered something abnormal in his competitive output. The distinction matters because it shifts responsibility for the loss back onto the match itself. The tactics, the execution, the shot selection, rather than onto an external narrative about status and pressure. The timing of this entire episode produced one additional data point that Toni Nadal didn't need to mention explicitly, because the scoreboard provided it. While Alcaraz was explaining his target on his back to the Indian Wells press corps, Jannik Sinner was playing the final on the same grounds. Sinner faced identical competitive pressure as world number 2. Every opponent at his level also elevates, also studies his game, also arrives at Masters 1000 events specifically prepared to beat him. He lost the opening 4 points of the second set tiebreak against Medvedev and won 7 consecutive points from that deficit to close the match. Sinner won the title, joining Novak Djokovic and Roger Federer as the only players in history to win all 6 ATP Hardcourt Masters 1000 tournaments. After the final, Sinner's post-match comments contain no reference to opponents elevating against him, nothing about targets, and no suggestion that carrying the burden of elite status was wearing him down. His focus in every press conference across the fortnight remained internal. Serve mechanics, baseline positioning, recovery between points. That contrast is not incidental. It is the most visible expression of the mentality gap Toni Nadal identified when he disagreed with Alcaraz on Radio Estadio. Beyond the philosophical dimension, Toni Nadal separately raised a practical concern about Alcaraz's physical condition at Indian Wells, telling Radio Estadio that he noticed the Spaniard arriving late to certain rallies and moving with less force than usual. His exact words, "I saw him a little tired in Indian Wells. In some rallies, he seemed to get there just barely and with less strength than usual, and I thought, maybe he'll skip some tournament." This observation adds a second dimension to the Indian Wells performance. The complaint about the target may have been partially driven by fatigue rather than purely by a philosophical misread of competitive dynamics. Alcaraz now heads to Miami as the top seed with just 30 ATP points to defend following his early exit at last year's edition. A deep run, or a title, adds up to 970 additional points. His new coaching setup under Samuel Lopez, still in its early months following the split with Juan Carlos Ferrero, faces its most significant test of the season in a fortnight that will reveal whether the Indian Wells mindset was a temporary dip or something structurally more concerning. Toni Nadal's challenge wasn't destructive. Precise and public, it carried the authority of someone who has seen this exact inflection point before. When a dominant young champion first encounters the psychological weight of sustained excellence and chooses, briefly, to explain the difficulty outward rather than resolve it inward, the response from those who have navigated it before is never sympathetic. It is instructive. How Alcaraz responds in Miami will determine which version of that story this becomes. If this breakdown gave you a perspective the post-match coverage completely missed, subscribe right now. Every week, this channel cuts deeper than surface coverage into the mental frameworks, tactical decisions, and behind-the-scenes coaching dynamics that shape the sport's biggest storylines. Drop your take in the comments. Is Toni Nadal right, or does Alcaraz have a legitimate point about what it costs to be world number 1? Hit the bell so you catch the full Miami breakdown as Alcaraz attempts to answer this question on court. The conversation is already running. Join it here.